The voice behind the silence was a quiet Monday morning in Mountain View. The sky outside Google's headquarters wore a soft gray, like it wasn't quite sure whether to rain or shine. Inside Building 43, everything was business as usual. The soft clicking of keyboards filled the open office, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the air like a gentle promise of productivity. But in a small, nearly forgotten hallway between the main conference rooms and the executive offices, something unusual happened. Sundar Pichai was walking alone. Without his usual entourage, without any calls in his ear or devices in his hands. It was one of those rare moments when he allowed himself to wander, to think without distraction. As CEO of Google, his days were usually filled to the second with meetings, reviews, decisions that carried the weight of billions. But this morning, something had pulled him away from the elevator. A strange curiosity, a need to stretch not just his legs, but his perspective. As he passed the janitorial closet, he heard it, soft at first, then clear. A voice, not loud, not rehearsed, but full of intent. Someone was speaking, then switching languages, fluidly, effortlessly. Bonjour. Je m'appelle Elena. Aujourd'hui nous allons parler du futur. Pause. My name is Elena. Huge sprechen wir über die Zukunft. Another pause. Hola mi llamo Elena. Hoy hablaremos del futuro. Sundar froze. He stood still in the corridor, just a few feet from the voice. It came from behind the slightly ajar supply room door. Someone inside was practicing phrases. Not rehearsing like an actor, but more like teaching, coaching. The tone was calm, warm, steady. He gently pushed the door open a little further. Quietly enough not to disturb. Inside, a woman in a navy blue cleaning uniform stood in front of a broken mirror taped to the wall. The light above her flickered faintly. She held a mop in one hand, and in the other, a small notebook filled with scribbles in different scripts. Her name tag read Elena. She hadn't seen him, she continued, moving from German to Russian, then to Hindi, and finally to Mandarin. Her pronunciation was nearly perfect in each. And with every switch in language, her face transformed, like she wasn't just speaking different words, but stepping into different worlds. Sundar felt a strange mixture of surprise, awe, and discomfort. He was the leader of one of the world's most innovative companies, where talent was scouted globally, where language learning apps were funded and voice recognition tech was always improving. Yet here, just a few doors down from his office, was a woman scrubbing floors, speaking in 9 languages like it was the most normal thing in the world. He stepped back before she noticed him, quietly, respectfully, and walked away, lost in thought. But the moment had already planted something inside him that afternoon. During a meeting with senior leadership about AI voice training and international expansion, Sundar's mind wandered again to the broken mirror, the soft voice, the humble notebook. And a question bloomed in him, persistent and unfamiliar. How many voices have we silenced with assumption? He went back later that evening. Elena was gone. The hallway was empty. The mop leaned against the wall like a forgotten prop after a play. The next day, Sundar made a quiet request to HR. Nothing dramatic. Just a name. Background. How long she'd worked there. Elena had been with the janitorial staff for 6 years. Always on time. Rarely spoke. Worked mostly nights and early mornings. No complaints filed. No special notes. Just a name on a list. He wanted to know more, but there was something else inside him. Something deeper than curiosity. Something uncomfortable. It was shame. He'd walked past her dozens of times. Maybe hundreds. And never once wondered what her story might be. Never once thought to say more than thank you or good morning. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying her voice in his head. Not just the languages, but the way she spoke them. Each one held a different rhythm, a different kindness. The next morning, Sundar arrived early, before most of the building. Came to life, he waited near the same hallway, and Just like clockwork, she appeared. Elena. She didn't notice him at first. She was listening to something in her earbuds, probably a podcast or language tutorial, he guessed. She walked with quiet purpose, pushing her cart, stopping to empty bins and wipe down surfaces like every movement had its own melody. He waited until she turned and saw him. For a moment, she looked confused, nervous even. She paused her audio, pulled out one earbud, and straightened up. "Good morning." Sundar said softly. "Good morning, sir." She replied quickly with a nod. "I heard you yesterday," he said. "You were practicing languages." "9 of them, I think." She blinked, hesitated. "Oh, ... I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone. I wasn't disturbing anyone, was I?" "Not at all," Sundar said, smiling gently. "In fact ... I was amazed." She looked away, embarrassed. "It's just something I do to keep my mind sharp." "Do you teach?" he asked. "I used to," she said quietly. "Back home. Before I came here. Now it's just ... a habit." He wanted to ask more, but didn't want to push. Something about the way she held herself, quiet, self-protecting, made him tread carefully. "If you ever have time," he said, "I'd love to hear your story." She looked up then, really looked at him, and for the first time there was the faintest trace of a smile. "Maybe," she said. "One day." Over the next week, Sundar found himself noticing things he'd ignored before. The invisible people, the quiet ones. The ones who entered and left rooms unnoticed, who cleaned up messes they didn't make, who fixed broken things, without anyone ever knowing their names. Elena was just one of many. But her voice stayed with him. He made it a point to greet her each morning when their paths crossed. Not just out of courtesy, but out of a growing need to understand. Who was she? Where did she learn all those languages? Why was she here cleaning floors at Google when clearly she had talents that reached far beyond? Finally, one morning, as they stood alone near the back hallway, she spoke first. "You asked about my story," she said. Sundar nodded. "If you're willing to share, I'd love to listen." She looked at the clock. Her shift had ended 10 minutes ago. "Okay," she said, "just a little." They sat down in the corner cafeteria. It was still early. The air smelled of croissants and quiet. "I'm from Bulgaria," she began. "I was a teacher. I taught languages at a small university. Russian, German, English. Then the university closed. Money problems, political problems. I tried to find work, but it was hard, so I came here to give my son a better chance." Sundar listened without interrupting. "I thought maybe I could teach here too," she continued. "But it's not so easy. Your degrees don't always translate. Your experience doesn't always count, and while you wait, life still happens. Bills still come, so I cleaned. It was honest work, and at night I kept learning." He was quiet for a long time. "Your son," he said finally. "Where is he now?" "He's in college," she said with pride. "Studying computer science." Sundar smiled. "Maybe he'll work here one day." "Maybe," she said. "He dreams big." He leaned forward. "And you? Do you still dream?" She looked away, then back. "Less than I used to, but yes." Pause. "What do you dream about?" He asked and just as she opened her mouth to answer, a voice cut through the air. "Mr. Pichai." "There you are. We've got the board call in 5. Aides rushed in, devices blinking, voices urgent. The moment broke. Elena stood up quickly, as if waking from a spell. "Thank you for the tea," she said. He looked at her. "This isn't over." "No," she agreed. "I don't think it is." But neither of them knew what was coming next, because just 3 days later, someone on the office staff would secretly record Elena during her early morning practice. And when that video hit the internal company chat, everything would change. Asterisk the video that broke the silence. Thursday morning began like any other at Google's campus. With the same rhythm of footsteps on polished floors, the hum of espresso machines, and the quiet buzz of anticipation that always floated through the air. People walked with purpose, armed with laptops and lattes. eyes scanning screens even while walking between meetings. But inside the company's internal chat system, a spark had just been lit. Someone had uploaded a short video clip. No title, number, context. Just one line in the caption. Who is she? It was a shaky phone recording, no more than 40 seconds long, but it hit like a wave dot in the video. Elena stood in that same dim hallway near the supply closet. She wore her faded cleaning uniform, her hair pulled back the way it always was. The lighting was poor, but her voice was clear. She spoke with calm assurance, switching between French, Arabic, and Japanese in seconds. There were no theatrics, no grand performance, just simple words, spoken with gentle clarity. As the video made its way through departments, from interns to engineers to senior managers, it began to draw comments. Is she ... One of the instructors from the language. A team? No, I think she's part of facilities. Wait, is that the janitor from Building 43? How does she know so many languages? This can't be real. Is she reading off a script? The questions turned into theories. The theories turned into debates. Some thought it was a stunt. Others believed she was a retired professor planted for a social experiment. But most, especially those who recognized her, were simply stunned. Asterisk. The video reached Sundar's desk within 2 hours. He watched it in silence, again and again. Not because it was new to him. He had already heard her, already spoken to her, but because of the reactions pouring in. He read every comment, every message, and one thing stood out above all. People were finally seeing Elena, not as a cleaner, not as background, not as invisible but as someone extraordinary. Still. Something about it unsettled him. He picked up his phone, called down to facilities. Has anyone spoken to Elena about the video? He asked. The answer came back in a quiet voice. She hasn't come in today. That's when he felt it. A low tension in his chest. Not panic. Not yet. But a kind of worry that only comes when you realize something you meant to protect has been exposed without warning. Sundar got up from his chair. He walked past his assistant, through the open floor of engineers and analysts, and down to the hallway where he'd first heard her. The door to the supply closet was closed. Her cart was gone. He stood there in the silence, feeling something unfamiliar. Helplessness. Later that afternoon, he managed to get her phone number through HR. It was listed under emergency contact info, barely updated in years. He hesitated before dialing. What could he say? When the line picked up, it was not Elena who answered. Hello, a young male voice. Hi, this is Sundar Pichai. I'm trying to reach Elena. A pause. She's not available right now. This was her son, Nikolai. Sundar introduced himself properly. He didn't use his title. He didn't need to. I saw the video, Nikolai said after a moment. Everyone did. I'd like to speak with her, Sundar said gently, just to make sure she's okay. Nikolai's voice tightened. She's overwhelmed. She didn't know someone was recording. She didn't ask for this. I understand. Truly, I do. If she's willing, I'd like to talk. Even if just for a few minutes. Nikolai was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, she'll call you when she's ready. And the line went dead. Sundar sat at his desk the rest of the afternoon, staring out the window. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting long shadows across the floor. People below moved like chess pieces, intentional, focused, unaware of how many silent stories passed beside them every day. He didn't hear from her that day, or the next. Meanwhile, the video continued to ripple outward. Someone posted it anonymously to Reddit. Then it made its way to Twitter. Within 24 hours, it was on LinkedIn, shared by influencers who knew nothing about her but spoke of her as the multilingual janitor, the hidden genius, the voice of humility. The comments multiplied. Admiration, disbelief, praise. P. In the midst of it all, one truth remained. No one had actually asked Elena how she felt. Until Sunday morning, the call came at 6:17 a.m. Sundar had been awake, sipping tea in the quiet of his kitchen, rereading one of his favorite books, an old, worn copy of The Alchemist. The irony wasn't lost on him. When the phone rang and he saw the name, he stood up without thinking. "Hello?" he said, voice low. "It's me," she said. He sat down slowly. "Thank you for calling," he said. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I didn't ask for attention," she said. "I just wanted to feel useful for myself, not for the world." "I know," he said softly. "And I'm sorry you were recorded without your consent. They all look at me differently now," she said. "Before I was invisible. Now ... I'm a symbol. I don't want to be a symbol." "You don't have to be," Sundar replied. "You're not here to inspire anyone. You're just you, and that's enough." A long pause followed. "Then why are you calling?" she asked. "Because I believe you have more to share," he said. "If you ever want to. Not for the internet. Not for the world. For us. Here. At Google. Maybe there's something we can build together. Something that honors who you really are." She let out a slow breath. "I don't know. No rush," he said. "But when you're ready, there's a room waiting." She didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, "I'll come in tomorrow." Monday. Morning came, and with it, a shift in the air. People arrived earlier than usual. Eyes glanced around corners. Some hoped to see her again. Others felt the shame of their own assumptions. Elena walked through the front doors of Google, not with a mop, but holding her notebook, the same one Sundar had seen before, filled with scribbles, translations, her own thoughts. She wore a plain blue blouse, hair neatly tied, eyes cautious but calm. Sundar met her in the main atrium. No cameras. No attention. Just a quiet walk together, side by side, past glass walls, and giant screen to a small private room tucked between two design labs. There. On a whiteboard were 3 words he had written earlier that morning. Voice, story, purpose. She looked at him. "I don't want fame," she said. "You won't. Get it here." He smiled. "Only work. Meaningful work." She sat down, opened her notebook. And began to speak. Not just in languages. But in truth. As she spoke of growing up in Soviet area, of being the only girl in her town to attend university, of her father teaching her ancient Greek by candlelight, of escaping political tensions, of carrying her son across borders for a better life. Something in the room shifted. It was no longer a meeting. It was a beginning, and neither of them knew yet that within weeks, her voice would inspire a completely new internal project at Google. One that would bring together linguists, developers, and AI trainers. One that would eventually reach schools, refugees, and forgotten communities. But that would come later. For now, it was just Elena. And her story. Unfolding. One word at a time. Asterisk. The room with no Nemeth sun filtered gently through the tall windows of Building 43 as the week began. Outside, the lawns of the Google campus were already buzzing with energy people walking dogs, sipping from chrome coffee cups, earbuds tucked in, minds deep in code or calls. But in one quiet corner of the building, tucked away from the polished glass and the neon brainstorm rooms, something deeply human was unfolding. The room didn't have a name yet. It had once been a storage space, just concrete walls, a desk, and an old projector that hadn't worked in years. But now it held something rarer than any new technology. It held a story. Elena sat in that room, her notebook open, her hands folded gently on the table. Sundar was there too, not as a CEO today, but as a listener, a student. His phone was off. His calendar was clear. It was a promise he had made to himself that when someone finally had the courage to share what had been buried for years, the least he could do was give them his full attention. Elena didn't need much prompting. When I was a girl, she began. I didn't speak for the first 3 years of my life. Not a single word. Sundar looked up from his notepad, surprised. My mother thought something was wrong with me, Elena continued. She took me to doctors. One said I might be mute. Another thought I had some brain delay, but my father. He said I was just listening. And were you? Sundar asked softly. Double quotes, yes. She nodded. I was listening to everything. The birds, The wind, the way people argued, the rhythm of footsteps. It was all language, even if it wasn't words. She smiled faintly, her fingers tracing a line in her notebook. When I finally spoke, my first sentence was in two languages, Bulgarian and Russian. My mother cried. My father laughed. They knew then that I wasn't broken, just built differently. The room held stillness, not the awkward kind, but the kind that asks you to breathe slower, to lean in. I loved words, Elena said. Not just their meanings, but the way they carried emotion. Some languages feel like soft rain. Others feel like firewood cracking in winter. And some feel like silence. Sundar leaned back in his chair, absorbing every word. He had sat in hundreds of pitch meetings, listened to thousands of. Product demos, heard engineers describe the mechanics of natural language processing with precision. But he had never heard anyone speak of language like this, like it was alive. I taught at the University of Sofia for years. Elena said, not just grammar, but story. I made my students write letters to strangers in languages they barely knew. Not to test vocabulary, to test empathy. She paused, then added with a quiet laugh, I once failed a student who wrote a flawless German essay, but never asked who they were writing to. Perfect grammar. Zero soul. Sundar smiled. I think a few AI models would fail that same test. Elena looked at him, her eyes searching. But why do you care about this? She asked. You run the most powerful company in the world. You have engineers building things I can't even understand. Why take time for a cleaner who tells stories? He didn't answer right away, then he said, because the best technology in the world means nothing if it doesn't understand people. And I think you understand people more than any algorithm we've ever... She didn't know what to say to that. So she said nothing. But something shifted in her shoulders, less weight. More openness, over the next few weeks. They met again. And again, sometimes for an hour. Sometimes just 15 minutes. And each time, Elena brought a new story. The boy in her village who taught himself Italian just to read opera lyrics. The old woman who only spoke Yiddish and told bedtime stories that lasted 4 hours. The deaf student who taught her how to speak with her eyes, that it was more than memory. It was a map of human connection, of forgotten wisdom, of the bridges between cultures that no wire or code could replicate. One day, Elena brought something new to their meeting. A box. Inside were hundreds of index cards, each one written in a different language. Handwritten, ink slightly faded, edges worn. On each card was a single phrase, always the same, translated over and over. You are seen. You are heard. You matter. Sundar picked up a few: Japanese, Swahili, Finnish, Korean. Dozens he couldn't even name. I used to carry these in my bag, she said. Whenever I met someone who seemed invisible, a migrant, a cleaner, someone forgotten, I'd give them a card in their language. How did they react? Sundar asked. Some cried, some laughed, some just nodded and held it like a treasure. But they always smiled. He looked at her, then down at the cards again. What if we made this bigger? He said, not just cards, a project, a platform, something that speaks these messages, these exact ones, in voices that feel real, something that reaches people who feel forgotten. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. You want to digitize kindness? He chuckled softly. I want to scale it. With your voice guiding it? You really think a tech company can make people feel like they matter? He paused. I think you already did, he said. We just need to listen. And so the project was born. They didn't announce it. No press releases. No grand reveals. Just a small room, a few trusted team members, and a simple idea. What if technology could be used not just to translate words, but to deliver dignity? Elena became the heart of the team. She helped design the tone, the pauses, the phrasing. She taught them that language wasn't just about accuracy, it was about presence. About respect. She recorded sample phrases in over 12 languages. Not just robotic translations, but full emotional ranges. A warm welcome, A comforting apology. A gentle encouragement. They tested it with local shelters, refugee centers, hospitals, and the feedback was overwhelming. A Syrian mother in a clinic in San Jose heard a voice in her own dialect say, "You are safe here." She wept out. A homeless teenager in Oakland heard, "Your story matters," in his native Tagalog, and asked if he could keep a device. They called it Project Eleonora, a name Sundar quietly chose one night, an echo of Elena and the word honor. And still, Elena insisted on one thing. "Don't make it about me," she said. "Let it be about everyone who ever felt invisible." The team agreed. And for a moment, it felt like everything was right. But one evening, as Elena was leaving the building, a sleek black car pulled up quietly outside. Two men stepped out, not Google staff, not media. Men in suits, with accents that made her shoulders tighten instantly. They didn't say much, just handed her an envelope, said a few words in her native tongue, words from another time. From a world she thought she had left behind. She stood frozen as they drove away. She opened the envelope slowly. And inside was a document. Not from the present. From her past. A file stamped in red. A name she hadn't heard in over 20 years. And just 3 words typed at the bottom. "We haven't forgotten." She clutched the paper, heart racing, hands trembling. Whatever she thought was behind her wasn't. Asterisk, the past never forgets. The night fell heavy over Mountain View, blanketing the Google campus in a hush that felt more like warning than peace. Lights glowed faintly from inside the buildings, but the corridors of Building 43 were silent. Only the faint hum of machines and the occasional flicker of a screen kept the space from feeling abandoned. Elena sat alone in the Project Eleanor room. The door was locked, the blinds drawn. The envelope sat on the table in front of her, its edges now slightly crumpled from the way she had gripped it all the way home, as though it might vanish if she let go. She stared at the document again, reading each line like it was a ghost whispering secrets she had buried years ago. It was an old intelligence file, Bulgarian state security, dated more than 25 years ago. Her name was printed at the top in bold, all caps Cyrillic. Below it, another name. A man's. Someone she hadn't thought of in decades. The memory came back like lightning. Fast. Uninvited. It was 1996. Sofia. Her apartment smelled of tea and rain. She had just returned from the university. And there, waiting inside, was him, her former colleague turned informant. The man who had the government silence voices that spoke too freely. He had warned her once. Told her to keep her lectures safe. Told her to stick to language, not story, not culture, not critical thought. But she hadn't listened. She taught anyway. About empathy. About resistance. About the way words could unsee power. And then suddenly her funding disappeared. Her passport was frozen. And one day, she came home to find her door forced open, her journals missing. She fled the next week, with nothing but a suitcase, her son, and the weight of things unsaid. And now, after all these years, they had found her again. But why now? Who still cared? Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the paper back into the envelope. Her phone buzzed. A text. From Sundar. Just checking in. How are you feeling about tomorrow's demo? She stared at the screen. Demo. The first internal unveiling of Project Eleonora was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the amphitheater. She was supposed to speak, to introduce the concept, to tell the story, not hers, but the story of why dignity matters in design, why inclusion begins with listening. The whole team was counting on her. But suddenly, everything inside her felt hollow. What would happen if they knew? If Sundar knew? Would they think she had lied? Would they think she had brought danger to their doorstep? She had worked so hard to stay invisible, to be small, to survive, and now she was about to be very, very visible. She sat in a quiet room for a long time. The envelope beside her, her hands folded tightly, as if to stop them from shaking. Outside, the night deepened. A storm was building clouds, rolling in from the west, wind tugging at the trees. And in the middle of it all, One woman sat in a room with no name, trying to decide whether to hide again, or to finally stand up. The next morning, Sundar arrived early. He wasn't dressed in his usual buttoned-up way. Today, he wore a simple gray sweater, black slacks, and a tired look in his eyes. He'd been thinking all night. He didn't know why, but something about Elena's silence after their last conversation had unsettled him. She had always responded, always with thought, with clarity. And now, suddenly nothing. He walked past the reception area, through the glass tunnel connecting to the amphitheater. The stage crew was already setting up, rows of chairs, large screens, a soft looping video showing brief phrases from project. Eleonora in dozens of languages, fading in and out like stars. You are seen. You are not alone. Your voice matters. He smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He checked his phone. No message from Elena. Then, at 9:12 a.m., she walked in, not through the front, not through the side door. But from the back of the room, quietly, with no fanfare, no assistance, just herself. She looked different today, not physically, but in the way she moved, slower, deliberate, as if every step carried weight. Sundar walked to her quickly. I was worried, he said softly, so only she could hear. I was too, she replied. He studied her face. Do you want to cancel? We can postpone, no pressure. She shook her head. No, I need to do this. He nodded, trusted her. When 10 a.m. came, the room filled with engineers, department heads, even a few external partners, diversity specialists, education leaders, non-profits they'd invited for early feedback. Sundar stood first. He gave a short introduction. What you're about to see is not a product, he said. It's a reflection of something more important than technology. It's a reflection of what happens when we listen to the people we usually overlook. He paused, and it all started with someone who was never supposed to be in the room. But today, she's not only in the room, she's leaving it. He stepped back. Elena stepped forward. For a second, the room was completely still. She looked up a sea of faces. Many she recognized, many she in single quotes. She opened her notebook. The same one with scribbled phrases and bent corners, and then she began not with a presentation not with a script but with a question. Have you ever felt invisible? The silence after the question was real. Thick. Asterisk. I have, she said. For years. Not because I lack talent or ideas, but because the world often doesn't ask to hear stories from people who clean floors or serve coffee or sleep on benches. But every person you pass, every person who seems small or silent, carries a world inside them. She then told them a story, not about herself, but about a refugee woman in San Jose who had used the prototype of Project Eleonora to understand a medical instruction for the first time, and who, in her native Farsi, had whispered through tears, for the first time in years, I feel human again. There were no slides, no bullet points, just her voice, and it was more powerful than anything projected on the screen. When she finished, the applause came slowly, not loud, but sustained, from the heart. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed and the team began their debrief, Elena stepped into the hallway, her hands now shaking. Not from nerves. Asterisk from the weight of the secret she still hadn't shared. Sundar joined her a few minutes later. You were incredible, he said. They'll remember today for a long time. She didn't meet his eyes. There's something I need to tell you, she said. He grew still. Something from my past. She handed him the envelope. He opened it. Read through the pages slowly, line by line. Asterisk. When he finished, he looked up at her. But he didn't speak. His eyes searched hers. I didn't lie, she said. I just never knew how to explain it. Who would believe me? Who would hire someone flagged by a broken government system decades ago? He was quiet for a long time. Then he did something she didn't expect. He stepped closer. And said, You still want to build this project? She nodded. Then let's build it. Your past doesn't scare me. Your silence doesn't shame. It protected you. Now you're not silent anymore. A breath escaped her, like air finally returning to her lungs. And for the first time since that black car pulled up outside, she smiled, not politely. But with the strength of someone who had chosen to stay, but just as she turned to walk back to the room, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. No words. Just a photo. Her son. Nikolai. Standing outside their building. Next to the same black car. And the message below it: come home, or he disappears. Asterisk. The quiet breath. Moment Elena saw the photo. Her breath caught in her throat like it had collided with a wall. She stood frozen in the hallway, one hand gripping her phone, the other pressed against her chest, as if her body instinctively knew something was breaking inside. The image was grainy, low resolution, probably taken quickly through a tinted window. But it was clear enough to see what mattered. Nikolai, her son, standing beside a black car, his expression unreadable. His hands in his pockets. Behind him, two men in dark suits, one standing too close, the other watching the street. Beneath the message sat like a blade. Come home, or he disappears. Elena's fingers went cold. Every instinct she had spent years trying to silence came roaring back all at once. Fear, urgency, survival. She had run before. She had lived in the shadows. She had learned to expect this kind of message when you dared to speak freely, when you carried truth. The wrong people wanted buried doubt, but not here. Not now. Not again. Elena? Sundar's voice was soft, but alert. What is it? She turned the phone so he could see. The moment he looked at the screen, his expression changed, calmness fading, replaced by something tighter, more serious. Who are they? He asked. Her voice was thin, nearly breaking. The single quotes read. From my past. Maybe from the government, or someone who worked with them. It doesn't matter. They know where he is. They want me to disappear. Sundar stared at the photo for a few seconds longer, then spoke with a quiet authority she hadn't heard in him before. We're not letting this happen. He turned, already in motion. Come with me, he said. She followed him down the hallway, through two security doors and into a private elevator she had never seen before. The ride was silent except for the hum of the descending shaft. When the doors opened, they stepped into a windowless room lined with monitors, secure terminals, and a small team of Google's internal security people who usually worked in the background, dealing with cyber threats, data breaches, and digital espionage. But today, the threat was different. It was personal. Sundar didn't waste words. He showed the team the photo, gave them Nikolai's address, and asked them to locate him immediately and confirm his safety. The team got to work without hesitation, typing, scanning, sending encrypted requests. Elena sat in a chair in the corner, clutching her phone like it was the last thing tethering her to her son. She tried not to imagine the worst. She tried not to remember the last time she had been threatened like this, back in Sofia, when they told her she'd lose custody of Nikolai if she didn't stop teaching dangerous ideas. Back then, she had been alone, no allies, no power, just instinct and flight. But now, she wasn't alone. Within minutes, the team confirmed that Nikolai was no longer at the location in the photo, but he had used his phone 15 minutes ago. A short call, 2 text messages, and most importantly, he was moving, slowly, but not erratically, not being chased. Not yet. Can we talk to him? Elena asked, voice trembling. They tried. No answer. They traced the phone to a nearby gas station, a small one, tucked near the freeway, with no cameras in its immediate vicinity. But one security camera across the street, on a traffic pole, captured a car matching the make and model of the black sedan pulling away. We need to find him before they leave the city. One of the analysts said. We can, said another. Give me 15 minutes. Elena's hands were shaking now. Sundar noticed. He crouched beside her chair, looking at her with steady eyes. We're going to get him back, he said. You don't have to run this time. You don't have to disappear. I don't want him hurt because of me, she whispered. He's strong because of you, Sundar replied. He's here because of the life you gave him. We won't let them undo that. But even as he said it, Elena's mind was spiraling. What if she hadn't stayed hidden enough? What if Project Eleonora had drawn too much attention? What if speaking up had cost her the one person she loved more than life itself? And beneath it all, one truth whispered louder than the rest. What if silence had always been the only way to survive? 25 minutes later, a secure call came through. One of the security team members handed Sundar a tablet with a video feed. On screen, Nikolai, sitting inside a white van, flanked by two of the internal Google security agents. Safe, a little shaken, but unharmed, Elena nearly. Collapse from relief, Mama. Nikolai's voice crackled through the speaker. She reached out, touching the screen like it was his face. I'm here, she said. They followed me, he said. They said if I didn't get in the car, they'd call immigration. I didn't know if it was real or just a threat. I got away when they stopped for gas. Ira, called a friend. You're safe now, Sundar said, stepping into the frame. You're with us, and we're going to protect both of you. Nikolai looked confused. Why is he? I'll explain later, Elena said softly. Just rest. They ended the call with coordinates to bring Nikolai to a temporary safe house arranged by the company. Not a large place, but secure. Anonymous. Off-grid. Sundar turned back to Elena. They know where you live, he said. You can't go back. Not yet, she nodded. I understand. He stood in silence for a moment, then said, Do you trust me? She looked at him, her eyes tired, but firm. Yes, then let me make this decision easy, he said. Picked up his phone and made one call. Within 5 minutes, 2 senior legal advisors and 1 high-ranking government liaison arrived in the room. Sundar briefed them in simple terms. Elena's history, the threats, the project, and the recent incident. And then he did something unexpected. He offered to sponsor full legal protection for Elena and Nikolai through Google's highest-tier security and immigration support. Not just for safety, but for dignity. If we let fear silence people like her, Sundar said, then we are no better than the systems we claim to disrupt. The room went quiet. Everyone nodded. But Elena, she sat still, then said, I don't want protection if it means hiding again. I want to be seen, not watched. Then let's build a system that does both, Sundar replied. One that protects and empowers. That evening, back in the now familiar Project Eleonora room, the team gathered again. Only this time, there were no rehearsals, no planning meetings, just questions. They asked Elena what it felt like to live in silence. They asked her what she would say to others like her, those who lived hidden, who worked quietly, whose stories had been reduced to whispers. She didn't have answers for everything, but she said one thing that none of them would forget. We spend our lives trying to be small enough to be safe, she said. But the moment you use your voice not to shout, but to speak truthfully, you grow. Not loud, not big, just real. And that's what frightens the people who want control, not volume, but authenticity. They recorded that sentence. They built it into the project. And the next phase of Eleonora shifted. It was no longer just about words. It was about story. About survival. About reclaiming space, not with noise, but with presence. But while they were building that, somewhere else, someone was watching, and the men in the black car weren't finished. Because the next morning, when the prototype of Project Eleonora went live for a private user test across 5 countries, a breach occurred. A single, deliberate cyber attack. Not from a random hacker, but from someone who knew exactly where to strike. Voice beyond silence in the early morning stillness, as the fog drifted softly over the rooftops of Mountain View. Building 43 pulsed with quiet urgency. It was barely 5 a.m., but the lights were already on, keyboards tapping, eyes locked to screens. Inside the Project Eleonora command room, the air was tense. A few hours ago, everything had been in motion, momentum, belief, even a kind of quiet hope. Then the breach happened. Not loud, not chaotic. It was the kind of digital attack only a few in the world could execute. Surgical, fast, and precise. Within 7 minutes, 3 backend servers hosting the Eleanor prototype were compromised, not destroyed, not corrupted, just accessed, copied, and left untouched. Like a thief who takes nothing but leaves behind the chilling knowledge they were there. Sundar stood at the center of the room, surrounded by engineers and analysts, his jaw tight, hands clasped behind his back. He had read the reports. He had listened to the debriefs. But he had also seen the signature hidden in the lines of stolen code, a small embedded message, buried where only someone who understood language deeply would find it. Asterisk, it was in Bulgarian, only 5 words. She still belongs to us.